It's wonderful to see you all here this morning. You're awake, you're nicely dressed, you are sitting promptly in the pews. It's great. But I have a question, and it's kind of a blunt one. Why are you here? After all, there are several other places that you could be this morning. You could still be at home, enjoying a morning coffee, having or a leisurely brunch. Depending on last night's activities, you could still be in bed. You could be out and about. The day is young, the weather is glorious today, and there could be many adventures that await for you. I'm sure that some of you even think, why am I here? I could be working. After all, studies show that 2/3 of Canadians work somewhere between 45 and 60 hours a week. So I'm pretty sure that there are people here thinking, I got a whole lot of work to do. Let's move this along. So what caused you to drag yourself out of bed, ignore any other things that you could have been doing, and come to this place this morning? Psalm 95 answers the question. It's an enthusiastic call to worship. It invites the community of faith to fill the halls of the temple with shouts of praise and songs of thanksgiving. But more than just an activity, this psalm is a call to response. We don't just worship because we choose to. We worship because we respond to the greatness of God. I invite you to pick up your Bibles and turn to Psalm number 95. There is a call to worship in our lives, which is much deeper than just, this is what I always do on Sunday mornings. I grew up in the church, and so I'm going to continue going to the church. The call to worship is a lot more than that. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord, our psalm begins. Now, it's not just about an individual. This is a call to an entire community. This psalm is written for Israel as a nation, as a community of worshipers. The community of faith is called together for a united purpose. Let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. And just so we didn't miss the point, in verse 1, it's repeated in verse 2. Let's make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. The worship of the community is called to be lively and expressive. This is emotive language. Sing and shout. Put all of your feeling, put all of your passion, put all of your faith into the songs that you sing, into the prayers that you say, into the responses of liturgy. Make sure that what you do here this morning and every time you gather for worship is a full and authentic representation of who you are faithfully. Have you ever seen that episode of Mr. Bean? When Mr. Bean goes to church. Have you ever seen that? It is hilarious, but in its hilarity, it is profoundly truthful. There is a moment, he goes to church, and it's very, very clear that this is an Anglican church. Obviously, Mr. Bean is written in England and performed in England, so it's a Church of England, and it's, it has an austerity to it, right? It is traditional, it is prim, it is formal. But there is this moment when the congregation starts to sing, "All creatures of our God and King." And it's all wonderfully dignified. Mr. Bean mumbles along until he gets to the refrain, which is the Alleluias. And this is a part that he knows. This is a part that he can sing. And Mr. Bean sings it out in gusto. He sings it out as loud as he possibly can. I think this is a fabulous image of the call to worship. When we come to church as a worshiping community, we are not called as reserved individuals encased in restrictive politeness. We are called to a place in which we worship together. John Wesley said, "Sing lustily and with good courage. I like the last bit, with good courage. Have the courage to sing. Who cares how you sound like? Who cares if technically you don't know the tune? Have good courage and sing. What would it look like if every opportunity we had to sing God as loudly as we could, we took it? What if the prayers that we said, the responses of our liturgy, were not said, but shouted from deep within us? Jesus, in our gospel, talks about worshiping in spirit and in truth. I wonder if this is what it's about. It is about infusing our worship with all the passion and authenticity that we can muster. Now, this isn't about loudness for the sake of loudness, right? We're not talking about the need to have everything upbeat all the time. It has to be, it has to move along. This isn't about having everything on the volume 10. There is a place of silence and there is a place of solemnness. After all, the same verse that talks about shouts of joy and songs of praise talks about bowing down and bending the knee. What undergirds the call to worship, the call that has brought us here, is the reality of the grandness of the God that we worship. He's the rock of our salvation. He is the great King. He holds all things together, but more profoundly, our great and glorious, our mighty and everlasting Savior is here. Yes, God is everywhere. But there is a special manifestation of God's presence when the community comes together to worship. Jesus says, where two or more are gathered together, I will be in the midst of them. The psalm today calls the community to come into his presence with thanksgiving. Verse 6, "O come, let us worship and bow down before the Lord, who is our Maker." For the community of Israel, to enter the temple was to enter the house of the Lord and to walk head on into God's presence. And so the temple could not be entered flippantly. It could not be entered half-heartedly. It demanded every ounce of their attention. And this is why the prophets, this is why Jesus himself is so critical of the faithful when they simply go through the motions and their heart is not in it. Today, we are to be challenged by the question. When we walk through the doors of the church this morning, did we acknowledge that as a community, we were gathering in the presence of our Maker? And it is in his presence that we have come to respond. Right? We are here because God has drawn us. But it's not just the grand truths that we are called to rehearse, that God is, the great King above all gods, and his hands are the corners of the earth, all of that. Our worship is deeply connected to the personal reality by which God has reached down and touched our lives. Verse 7, we are the people of his pasture. We are the flock under his care. God is not just the creator, but God is also the shepherd, the one who feeds us and the one who leads us. How have you experienced the care of the Lord? In what ways has God comforted you? In what ways has God healed you or provided for you? In what ways does the consolation of God cheer your soul when the weight of the world seems to loom large? There is a deep sense of intimacy that is described. God did not create you and just step away to watch you from a heavenly telescope. His hand that upholds the deep caverns of the earth are the very ones that uphold your life. God has formed you just as God has formed the mountains. And in that forming, God's love explodes over you. And we together, out of God's sheer delight to be in the presence of the one he so loves and longs for, has invited us. He has called us into his presence to enjoy his grace and to hear his word. Oh, that today you would hear his voice. There's a beautiful ambiguity in this verse. Is not exactly sure as to whether this is a challenge, oh, that today you would hear his voice, or a promise that today you can hear his voice. I think it's probably a bit of both. With God's presence near us here, with us gathering in a heart of openness to the grandness of God and submission to him as the one whom our souls delight, the voice of God is spoken into our lives. In our worship, there is this call to recognize and respond to the voice of God. Can we have the boldness of faith to believe that, yes, when I gather as the community of faith, when I gather in openness and heartfelt worship, I can hear God speak into my life? Now, all the verses that come after this, there's this call, oh, that today you would hear his voice. And then it talks about harden not your hearts, as in the day of provocation. All the verses that come afterwards that seem to be a little bit negative, that talk about hardening hearts. For Israel, it was all about remembering their own history, about times when their minds were set upon themselves and their own plans, and made it impossible for them to recognize God's presence, to hear God speaking into their midst. And so the call for Israel, and the call to us who recognize that we kind of stand in the same vein, is to recognize our propensity to be distracted as well. The call is for today, this moment right now. Do not let other things get in the way. Do not be so distracted by the demands of the world that you forget that you gather in the presence of God and that you can hear God's voice. Because you are here and God is with you. So open yourself and allow the creator of the world, the sustainer of your life, to speak into your life. On this passage, Charles Spurgeon said, "Today is a day of opportunity. There is this day set before us, an open door of approach to God. There is a very favored day, for it is the Lord's day, the day of rest, consecrated to the work of grace. This is a day of good tidings. Therefore, beloved, I pray you seize this golden moment." For the woman at the well, there was a glorious day when she found herself in the presence of Jesus. And Jesus spoke to her about the kingdom of heaven. He spoke to her about who she really was. He spoke to her about what his love could do for her. What if that day is today for us here? What if God is speaking to you right now? What if you have been drawn here today to this place of worship, to this community that gathers, so that you could hear the voice of God? What if God has something life-giving, life-shaping to speak into your life? What if today God would answer that question that you're asking? Or possibly give you such an experience of his holy presence that the questions you hold just kind of fade into the background? What if, by responding to his presence in heartfelt, open worship, you are graced with the experience of feeling the Lord respond to you? If that could be the case, then harden not your heart. Do not dismiss it or disregard it. Allow the presence of God, allow the voice of the Lord to mold you. Heed your directions or the encouragement spoken into your life. Allow the Lord to declare who you are. And so, in faithful anticipation that the Lord will speak, and when we as a community bow ourselves down in acknowledgement of his presence, we are going to hold 2 minutes of silence before we get into our anthem. It's about turning our attention to him. It's about opening the space in us to hear and to respond. This is about taking a moment to bow the knee, to kneel before the one who is here, so that we can hear his voice, and afterwards rise into our prayers and into our songs and shout in joy and sing our songs of praise. Let us take 2 minutes of silence.